We bid you welcome. We don't ask that you believe or expect you to think a certain way, but only that you try to live a kindly and helpful life with the dignity proper to a human being. Welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who might find our friendship, strength, and encouragement in daily living. Good morning. Welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. My name is Barb Eglinton, and I'm the program moderator overseeing Program Council. And this morning, we are fortunate to have a guest speaker, Chris Edwards, with us today. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a few minutes. I'd like to welcome any visitors today and invite you to coffee hour, which is now indoors downstairs in Adams Hall, where we have coffee and bagels. I know everyone's happy about that. And during coffee hour, you may remove your mask if you feel comfortable or continue to wear it. But while we're in the meeting house, we do observe COVID precautions, and we're wearing masks unless we're speaking at the microphone. Religious education classes are held in the classroom, and if you need to know where those are, an usher can direct you. And joys and sorrows will be shared later in the service. There's 3 ways that you can share. There are blue cards in the pews that you can fill out and put into the offertory basket when it comes around. You may come up to the microphone and share your joy or sorrow in person, or you may text me. My phone number is at the beginning of the order of service. Now, please join with me and affirm our mission. We'll recite together. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. And now it's time for announcements, and I know Katie has an exciting announcement.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. For once, I am not up here to ask you to sign up for something. As you know, for the past year or so, we've been looking for an RE coordinator, and we found one. So I am here to introduce our new RE coordinator. This is Cortez. If you recognize her, and you might, she is Kelly Petrie's sister. She has a long experience with being a special needs instructor and a naturalist educator in our communities. And we're super excited to welcome her. So if you see her this morning, she'll be hopping in and out of the classrooms, and she'll probably be down in coffee hour. So if you could give her a warm welcome, that would be great. We're so excited that she's here. Do you want to say anything, Corey?
I just want to say thank you. I'm really honored to be here and to be part of the UU family. And yeah, if you have any questions or just want to come and say hi, please do. I'm excited to meet you all and to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Should I read it? Okay. Linda kindly gave us a announcement about our Raise Right app. We're going to do a big push for this over the next month or so. We've talked about Raise Right for a while, but we now have 21 people signed up in the program, and over the past year, we have raised $1,300 for the church through the Raise Right app. And Kelly and I'm going to brag for a second, we've done $134 just by ourselves. So that's a great start, but we have agreed to a goal budget of $4,000 for the church year, so that's until through next June, when we've voted on the budget. So we have a ways to go. We'd like to see everyone sign up for the program and start actively using e-gift cards. It's very simple to help you get going. We have flyers today. We've already jumped on some of you with these. It has information and sign-up instructions. Each week, please watch for more tips and tricks that we'll be telling you to help maximize using the program. Using Raise Right is the easiest fundraising ever. The church gets a portion of what you're already planning on spending. Many businesses here, Home Depot, Amazon, Gap, Meijer, you name it, Shell. We have a physical Shell gift card that we use. It's very easy to reload. We can reload it with cash. So let's get going. And Karen has wonderfully designed our flyer and the PowerPoint that you saw there as well. And did you?
Couple of thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I'm new here, and I finally went on this app and checked it out for myself to see how you do it, what you have to do, how easy it is. And initially, I looked at it and I was kind of intimidated. And I'm pretty computer savvy, so that's why we delineated everything. Linda was so kind to come up with this simple way to go on, log on, go through the steps, and use it. Now, there were two little things that as I used it, I could see as potential, you might say, I don't know if I want to do this. And the first one was that it asks, there's two ways you can pay for your card, which we make a significant percentage. I mean, I think like just Dick's, getting a Dick's gift card for my grandson, we get 8% back for not spending any additional money. So you're not like paying that $8 out of your pocket to the church. It's coming from Dick's. So that's pretty cool. But here's the little glitch. No, it's not a glitch. It might be something that you might go, I don't think I want to do this. It does ask you to put in, you can pay two different ways, with a credit card to get a card, or two, you can have it taken directly out of your checking account or your savings account. And initially I went, I don't know if I feel comfortable putting this in, but it is so vetted. And I mean, think about it. I pay, I don't know how many bills online that take it right out of my checking account. It's very safe. I just want to give you some assurance that this is okay, and don't be intimidated by it. And once you get into the system, like Linda said, she can reload her card right at the checkout. And there's a lot of cool ways that this can really be a benefit to us if we change the way we shop. That's all. And it's really hard to get that mindset. Anyway, that's all I have to say. And those of you who are already, I want one other thing. Those of you who are already doing it or have done it, can you raise your hand? One. Okay, we have about 8 people here. Those people are good people for you to approach and say, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me?
One more time.
One? Okay, so I've sort of done it. I can probably help you get through it. Yeah. So,
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joan Daly, the chairman of the Daytimers. Now, a lot of you might not know that Daytimers is a nice, informal social group for people 50 and over. And we meet on the third Thursday of the month at noon, and we just get a chance to express what's on our mind and have lunch together. You bring your own lunch and beverage, and we sit around and talk and get to know each other very well. So take this opportunity for anybody who's new or wasn't aware that Daytimers were for the senior group.
Marie Laurie, Social Justice again. The UU The Vote initiative is going very, very well. We're doing a lot of letters. There is tonight at 7 o'clock another event. Come and write letters with us. Next Sunday after service, we'll be doing it again. And if you have interest in meeting at another time, please hit Barb Ivan up or me, and we'll figure out something else to get you going. We are also next Sunday, not this Sunday, my fault, collecting. We would like, if you have any forever stamps at home, if you have old forever stamps and want the karma for delivering them at current rates, that's great. Any forever stamps or cash, we won't be asking for checks next week, but for support to actually mail all these letters that we're writing. We'd appreciate that. So that's going very well. And my other announcement is that there are some of these signs in the back of the meeting house. I went yesterday to pick them up. There were 3 women in the room, and I said, they said, how many do you want? I said, how many can I have? And they said, well, 3. And I said, no, I'm bringing them to my church. And 2 of the women went, oh, to your church? And one went, what UU church do you go to? So there are about 20 in the back. If we run out and you want more, I can get more this week. Let me know. Thanks.
Thank you. You can check our website for more announcements. Now let's rise as you are willing and able for our first hymn, 163 in the hymnal. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Chris Edwards began his career as a forecaster in the U.S. Air Force. He was then one of the first meteorologists with the Weather Channel in Atlanta. He began carefully studying and reporting on global warming in 1987. Chris was the chief meteorologist at WJBK-TV Fox 2, Detroit, before leaving in 2004 to spend more time with his family and to start his own business, teaching weather science. In 2011, he joined WXYZ-TV, where he worked until December of 2018. He was honored with 3 Emmy Awards for environmental reporting and weather forecasting. As a retired TV meteorologist, he now enjoys part-time work at the University of Michigan. Chris also serves as a climate change specialist for the city of Detroit and regularly gives climate change presentations to a variety of organizations. Please help me welcome Chris Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Barb, and thank you all for inviting me here today. It really is an honor. I loved that hymn that we just sang. It's so incredibly appropriate. Just to give you a brief overview, we're going to watch some slides. We're going to look at some slides, and I will move through them quickly enough that hopefully they don't drag on. I will move through them slowly enough that hopefully they will make sense. But the good news is that when I'm finished, I will have time to answer some questions. And also I will tell you, even after the service is completely over, I will linger until they throw me out and answer any questions that anybody has or take any comments. I learn from the questions, and I want to keep learning. And as Barb mentioned, I did start studying what was actually called global warming at that time. Some even called it the greenhouse effect in the 80s. We'll talk about that in just a moment as we start looking at the slides, but this is a subject that I've watched academically, but I've also watched it evolve in a whole lot of different ways. The science has evolved, the perceptions have evolved, the technology has all evolved significantly in the years. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and talk about our changing climate. As we begin, I want to point out something that Climate Central is an organization, a nonprofit organization that is policy neutral, and they're a news organization that analyzes and reports on climate science. I've been working with their meteorologists since they got going in 2008, and this morning's is a presentation of verified facts that's derived from the latest scientific consensus. And my thanks to the folks at Climate Central for helping with that. We'll just start off by saying that climate change is simple, it's serious, and it's solvable. And we're going to talk about all three of those things because they are all very important. You might say equally important as we discuss this. And you might say to yourself, simple, well, it seems kind of complicated to me, all this science. Well, it can be, certainly, but let's talk about the basics. Because really the basic idea of climate change is that people burn fossil fuels. That's coal, oil, and natural gas. And this burning of fossil fuels puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide, sometimes we'll call it CO2, it's a greenhouse gas, and it makes the planet warmer. That's the simple part. Let's talk a little bit about our atmosphere. I promise there won't be any quizzes. These are the things, however, that are important to know. 99% of our atmosphere, nitrogen and oxygen. Doesn't have anything to do with greenhouse gases, but within less than 1%, there are these trace greenhouse gases. Trace because they're such a small number, but they have a very huge outside impact. And particularly, we're going to focus on carbon dioxide and methane. Nitrous oxide, a much smaller player. Water vapor, something in general that we really don't have much control over. So these gases are greenhouse gases. And you might have heard of the greenhouse effect. As I mentioned, a long time ago, people conflated very often the greenhouse effect and global warming or climate change. Let me just tell you, the greenhouse effect makes our planet livable. So I'll take just a brief moment to explain it a little bit, because the greenhouse effect starts with sunlight reaching the Earth. Of course, the sun is a long way away, but the energy from it reaches us here, and some of that energy is reflected back into space. However, some of it is absorbed and re-radiated back to the ground as heat. And it's a really good thing that happens. Now, most of the heat is absorbed by greenhouse gases and then radiated in all directions, which warms the Earth. If we did not have the greenhouse effect, the average temperature on the planet would be about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a very good thing that we have it, because now, with the greenhouse effect, the average temperature on the planet is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, though that number is going up, as we'll discuss. But slight changes in the greenhouse gas concentrations can alter the climate, and it affects the world all around us. Now, many of us only learned about the greenhouse effect perhaps in high school or more recently than that, but the science linking carbon dioxide to warming is quite old. In the 1820s, going back to the 1820s, Joseph Fourier was actually one of the first proposing that gases in the atmosphere kept the Earth warmer than it would otherwise be, 200 years ago. Then in the 1850s, Eunice Foote, an American scientist, discovered that carbon dioxide warmed the air around it. And I have to stop for just a moment. Women in science, they have been making contributions for a very long time, very important contributions, and I applaud all women in science. They can do amazing things, are continuing to do that. I just have to brief. Our own daughter is a molecular biologist trying to find cures to cancer. There is no end to what science can do, and especially women in science, and I applaud them whenever and however I can. Now, back to the 1890s, Arrhenius. In the 1890s, he went as far as calculating that a doubling of atmospheric carbon dioxide would raise the Earth's temperature several degrees. In the 1890s, he was doing this. And then Callendar, Guy Stewart Callendar in the 1930s from Great Britain. He refined Arrhenius' calculations, and he made the first climate projections way before there were any computers. And his projections assembled the first evidence for global warming. And many scientists actually still call the greenhouse effect the Callendar effect. So, with that simplicity established, obviously carbon dioxide plays a critical role in regulating our temperature. In the 1800s, we started burning more fossil fuels, particularly the second half of the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution. Now, these fuels powered not only that revolution, but they helped power an increase in the living standard of millions of people around the world. There's no doubt about it. But we're focused on what it does to the atmosphere. And so if Callendar and the others were correct, then we would expect to see temperatures rise as the CO2 increases. So let's look at this. This is a graph of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere going back to the late 1800s, essentially the time when the Industrial Revolution was starting to make a significant difference. It started off around 290 parts per million, roughly, at that time. And you can see what's happened between then and a couple of years ago. So, by the way, the latest carbon dioxide number, the highest we've ever seen, came in May. It was 417 parts per million. And unfortunately, that number just continues to go up. Well, how about the relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature? Well, it's pretty clear. Obviously, there are ups and downs, as you would expect. This is a smoother trend line with the carbon dioxide. There are ups and downs in temperature, but it doesn't exactly take a mathematician to figure out the key point. CO2 is increasing. It's causing the planet to warm. That's the simple part. Now, a brief moment given to methane. I mentioned it at the beginning. It seems to be in the news a little bit more in the last year or so. Actually, they just negotiated a global attempt to reduce methane emissions. But just briefly about methane, you can see since the early 80s how that's been going up as well, rather markedly. Here's the thing about methane. Molecule for molecule, it's about 80 times more problematic than carbon dioxide. So it's really bad in terms of the methane emissions. The good news about methane is that it doesn't take as long to break down. 8 to 10 years is all it takes for methane to fall out of the atmosphere. So the good news is if we can cut down the methane, within a decade, it's no longer an issue. Carbon dioxide, unfortunately, is much more durable, typically staying in the atmosphere for closer to 100 years. And that's one of our challenges, but I want to give methane its due because it is a concern and we don't want to forget about it, and reducing our emissions of methane is important as well. So let's localize this just a little bit, just briefly here to talk about Detroit, because this is a global issue that we're discussing, but we live in one place. And this is Metro Detroit, our average temperatures, and here's what they were in the 70s, because all the time I hear from people that say, oh, I remember when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. Add your own story about cold, snow, and all that. Well, there are lots of reasons for those perceptions. Some of them have to do with the things that we remember, but some of them have to do with the fact that it actually was colder then. In the 70s, on average, the average temperature around here was 48.5 degrees, and now it's about 51.5 degrees. And you can see it's gone up in stair steps, slowed down a little bit from the 90s to the aughts, but the trend is clear, and the trend is continuing even locally. So even though this is a global issue, it is felt locally. And by the way, in case you wondered, also breaking it down to the local area, most of the highest percentage of the warming has actually come during the winter. Now I know some of you will say, that's great. That's great. Extend the golf season. I'm okay with that. And I'm not making judgments here, not at all. But more of the warming has been in the winter, the least amount during the spring months, and a pretty modest amount during summer and fall, also having gotten warmer in the local area. All right, so while we're on the simple, let's talk about not only the past, what has happened and how we got to where we are, but what can happen. This is what's going to happen with temperatures if we really don't make any changes. These are changes in average temperature in Fahrenheit. And we're actually closer to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how you measure it, what has already occurred. Close to 2 degrees Fahrenheit at this point. If we continue on our current path by the end of this century, we're going to be in here. And let me just tell you right now, we don't even want to think too much about what happens in that area if we warm 7 degrees Fahrenheit. However, if we make significant emissions cuts, we can start to do this. And that's part of what we're talking about. The models that have been telling us since the 80s what's going to happen are clearly telling us that if we do nothing, we're on that red path. If we make significant changes, temperatures will stabilize. The longer we wait, the worse it gets, which leads us into the serious. What are the consequences? All right, well, this is the part that we all have to pay attention to because the impacts of climate change are serious and will continue to be. Now, I'm going to focus on a couple of them right now, the rising seas and wild weather. Now, these are things, particularly the second one, that we hear about all the time, that is literally in the news regularly. And you cannot go more than a couple of days without hearing about some of these consequences. Warming that's leading to wilder weather and rising seas. Now, up to this point, we've been talking about these averages. But here's the weird thing about averages. They tell a significant story, but what happens with averages is when you change the average and the curve slides this way, you get a lot more of this. You get a lot more of the extreme heat and significant heat. What do you get less of? Obviously, less extreme cold and less cold. That doesn't mean there isn't any. I helped produce a video with U of M helping people understand that even in an age of a changing climate, extreme cold can happen. Indeed, there are some theories that suggest that brief periods of extreme cold are potentially more likely because we're changing the patterns of jet streams around the world. Having said all that, you're going to tilt more toward the extreme heat and the heat. We have seen that as recently as this summer. By many, many measures, China had their hottest summer ever on record. And believe me, they have records that go back a long way in China. These are elements of what we would expect to see and what we are seeing with this extreme heat, not just the averages. Now, we bring it back to the United States. And unfortunately, this has kind of been in the news lately too. Extreme weather disasters. One way, and it seems kind of heartless to me, but one way that this is kept track of is disasters that exceed $1 billion in cost. Obviously, we can't talk about the human cost because it's immeasurable, but we can measure the inflation-adjusted cost, the inflation-adjusted cost and these billion-dollar weather disasters. On average, you go back a whole lot of years. I think our data set is, it's about 40 years. On average, we've been having about $7 billion disasters a year. And again, I remind you, these are inflation-adjusted dollars, so it's held to a single standard there. How many have we been having lately? Look at these numbers. 15, 2020, we had 22 of them, $22 billion disasters. That's just in this country, by the way. There were 20 last year, including 2 historic severe weather events that resulted in a large loss of life. And it's not on the graph yet because obviously we haven't finished this year yet. But Hurricane Ian, as it just slammed into the southwest Florida coast, probably going to end up being on a dollar figure between $75 and $100 billion. When people talk about remediation and addressing this problem is going to be expensive, there's no doubt about that. But look how expensive this is, and this is not even talking about lives. So, a brief look again back to Detroit, and what this slide shows is in red, these are the number of days or number of occasions where we had record heat, and the blue is record cold. Notice that for many, many years we had more in the way of heat than hot records than cold records. We had a brief period in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where we actually had more cold. Again, this is one point on the planet, but there's no doubt that even here locally, the last 3 decades, the record highs have just been smashing the record lows. This just isn't even close. And again, that's locally. Globally, the top 10 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2005. All of them since 2005. All right, so we've talked a little bit about some of the changes. I can tell you that snowfall patterns change too. As the climate gets warmer, there's less snow, as temperatures are more frequently above freezing. Now, late fall and early spring snow is on the decline in a lot of locations. Cold climates like ours can get more snow, however, when it is below freezing because there's more moisture in the atmosphere than there used to be in decades past. And this is part of where sometimes people begin to get a little questioning about what is going on. Is this really global warming when it's snowing 3 inches an hour? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive because it might be 32 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing instead of 30 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing, but the atmosphere holds more moisture and you can get some very heavy snow. One other big consequence is in mountain locations, more of the winter precipitation is falling as rain instead of snow. Lead to problems, for instance, in the western United States, where a lot of their water is stored as snowpack, but if it falls as rain, it runs off right away. And that's a significant problem for those parts of the country. We'll touch more on that in just a bit. Now, I could stand up here for a solid hour and show you guys lots of beautiful pictures of glaciers that don't look the way they used to. And I mean, really, it's a little sad to see them recede, but some of them are beautiful pictures. I'm just going to show you one because this is representative of 7 measly years and the recession or the melting of this particular glacier, which is up in Alaska. This happens to be the Bear Glacier in the Kenai Fjords National Park in south central Alaska. But in just 7 years, we have seen the warming temperatures and how it has produced the melting in that particular area. This is going on at a faster rate closer to the poles. The poles are warming 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, which is where more of the people live near the rest of the planet. But the people that live in those poleward locations, particularly the North Pole, because there's a lot less on the South Pole in terms of people that live, they have already been dealing for 1 or 2 generations with unbelievable change in their lifestyle. And it's in part because of the receding of these glaciers. All right, up to this point, I've been talking mainly about land, but I have to give some attention to the oceans because the oceans are also heating up. Indeed, by some measures, about 90% of the heating that we have produced that has come from the increase in fossil fuels has been absorbed by the oceans of the world. And only about 10% so far has been absorbed by the land. And by the way, we believe that right about now, the oceans are essentially saying, that's it. It's about all we can take in terms of the warming. The rest of it, you guys have to figure it out. And here's what's going on with those oceans. Wherever you see this red or orange or yellow, that's warmer temperatures in the oceans than what there used to be. This data period, okay, so it's 120 years. But I just have to point this out briefly because those that look closely at this map often look at this. What's going on here? What's going on here across the North Atlantic? It's blue, which is colder. And you don't see that too many times on these maps, colder. That keeps showing up year after year. It shows up in the long-term data and the short-term data. What's going on? That's Greenland. And I think that probably you guys can figure it out for yourselves. The glacier melt from Greenland is pouring into the North Atlantic Ocean and cooling the waters. The Gulf Stream does this. It moves up the east coast of the U.S., goes up here, comes around the west part of Europe, and keeps them relatively milder than they would otherwise be because it still is a relatively warm current flowing south. Well, as that Gulf Stream does this and it hits that cold water off of Greenland, the Gulf Stream is messed up. And the Gulf Stream and the other world ocean currents have a whole lot to do with patterns that drive weather, the jet stream patterns. So in a nutshell, scientists know this is going on. They know why it's going on. They have, of course, like scientists like to do, assigned a nice long name to it that you have to use an acronym for. That's the Atlantic Meridional Oceanic Circulation, or called the AMOC for short. Okay, so scientists have done all that, but when people ask the question, what is it going to mean? We don't know. That's the truth. Climate science does not understand what that's going to do.
This is a giant experiment that we are conducting. What is it going to do, the patterns? Let me tell you, they're very, very worried about it in Western Europe because this impacts their weather in a massive way. Well, it doesn't get quite as much attention around here, except in climate scientists' world, because we realize that that is going to have significant impact, but we don't know exactly how. And unfortunately, that is just illustrative of the fact that there are certain elements of this massive experiment that we're conducting with our planet that we don't understand. We understand a lot, and I told you I'd focus on facts and things that we know. There are theories about what's going to happen here. Some of them get sensationalized and turned into Hollywood movies, but we would like to keep it to facts, and unfortunately the facts there don't tell us what's going to happen. All right, a brief moment on sea level rise. This is a long-term chart of how the sea level has changed in the last 2,000 years. Went up a little for 100 years, and went down some, went up a little, went down some, whoa! Look at that, in the last 100 years. Warm the water, it takes up more space. It's as simple as that. And sea level rise of 5 inches may not seem all that significant to you, but in Miami, they're having clear sky flooding all the time in South Florida because the sea levels continue to rise. And that obviously is going to have an impact on millions of people around the world that live on or near the ocean's coasts. Higher tides make for more flooding. Now, this may not be an immediate, this is going back to 1970, so we've got about a 50-year period. These are the number of coastal floods that are occurring yearly. The message here is pretty clear. That's going to become more frequent, more significant. Now, that does not have a direct impact on those of us in Southeast Michigan, but whenever you have more flooding, it becomes an issue for millions of people. All right, warmer air has a huge influence on a lot of things. A lot of people will think, okay, so it's warmer. Less winter sounds okay to me. Even if it's a little too hot some days in the summer, that's okay. Well, perhaps that's true. But one of the most important parts of this entire equation is that warmer air holds more water vapor. It's more humid in the summer. It feels sticky in the summer because the air is warmer. An increase in temperature allows for more evaporation into the atmosphere from surfaces like oceans, lakes, even soils and plants. So more water is available for storms. And remember, almost 3/4 of the planet is water. Now, this effectively supercharges the water cycle. You know that thing we all learned about in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade? The water cycle. It increases the amount of rain and snow in heavy precipitation events, but interestingly, it also leads to larger, longer droughts. And some people have a little trouble understanding, how can it allow more heavy rain, but also more drought? Well, the atmosphere gets warmer. It's like a sponge that holds more water. When you wring it out with a storm, it produces more. On the other hand, if the available water isn't available, you just have a hotter atmosphere. And a hotter atmosphere bakes things more quickly and dries them out. So even though it may seem counterintuitive, you get heavier storms, more flooding, and you get longer, more persistent droughts. Wet seasons get wetter, dry areas get drier. And that's the unfortunate reality that the computers started telling us in the 80s, and we are now with increasing frequency seeing all over the world. But let's talk about our country. These are areas, increases in heavy precipitation events in different parts of the country. It's not even. You wouldn't really expect it to be even. It's most significant in the Northeast and secondarily here in the Midwest, where you have 55% and 42%, respectively, more events of heavy precipitation. And how is that playing out? Well, maybe it's played out in your own backyard. I know certainly in the city of Detroit, in 2021, there were 3 disastrous flooding events in and around the city of Detroit. Now, is infrastructure related to that? Absolutely it is. There's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be done. But climate change is making this worse because the atmosphere can hold more moisture, and that moisture comes down in very heavy precipitation events. Just this year, you might have heard about the floods in Yellowstone that wreaked havoc on that amazing place. Those are the most severe floods there, with the records going back to 1892. St. Louis, eastern Kentucky, both places that this summer experienced historic rainfall, 8 to 9 inches in a few hours, and produced incredible rates of flooding. And although it's maybe not been getting as much publicity here, the country of Pakistan just in the past few months has had such severe flooding that up to half of the country was covered with water. This is all going from, in part, the same thing. Climate change is making this more likely and more severe. We're seeing more intense rainfall here locally too. Again, I'm kind of bringing it to home. And this shows in the last 50 years, the average hourly rainfall, it just goes up higher. We're seeing it here in a fairly significant way. Now, in 2022, we did not have, in the warm season, we did not have any severe floods in the local area. That's wonderful, and we might continue to get lucky. But the long-term pattern is pretty clear and part of the serious nature of what we're talking about. I'm going to take a moment to talk about hurricanes in part, and it was, of course, on today's program. This picture of a hurricane and Ian having come ashore in Florida just a couple of weeks ago, making tremendous amounts of news. However, I heard some misinformation in the wake of that, and some of it was that hurricanes are going to be more common because of climate change. There will be more hurricanes because of climate change. The science does not support that, by the way. The science supports that the warmer water provides more fuel for hurricanes and that they can produce heavier rain and a higher storm surge, in part because the sea levels start out higher anyway. And the most recent science is also supporting, starting about 6 to 8 years ago, the models started telling us that a couple of interesting things would be more likely to happen. Storms would intensify soon before landfall in a significant way. That was number one. And the other thing they said was that they would start to slow down more. Hurricanes would start to not move at such a significant forward speed. Let's face it, if a hurricane comes through your area, if it has to do that, you want it moving at 20 miles an hour, not 5 or 10, because it gets out of there more quickly. It's fewer hours that you're having to deal with those horrendous conditions. Well, the models started telling us that, and guess what Ian did? It intensified right before it made landfall, and it slowed down. But it wasn't just Ian. We've got about 8 storms in the last 5 years that made landfall in the U.S. that did essentially the same thing. So, I'll put it to bed by simply saying hurricanes aren't necessarily going to become more likely. The science actually shows there might even be fewer hurricanes. But the ones that hit will be more consequential. And on the flip side, drought. Just want to show you, particularly in the western United States, where around California and Nevada, they're experiencing the worst long-term sustained drought they've had since the 1300s. Droughts are getting more common and they're lasting longer, and that's what we're seeing into moderate, severe, and extreme droughts. Now, the western U.S. is not the only area that's susceptible to this. We, even in this part of the world, are, but it's much less common here than it is there. And of course, drought leads to more fires. There are a lot more wildfires, and they tend to be more widespread and last longer. That is something that was expected. That is something that is occurring. Part of the reason, I have to say, part of the reason that's happening too is that millions of trees in the West were killed by spruce and pine beetle devastation, and now they're sitting there dead, standing in the forest, and they are just kindling, waiting for a fire to come along. And by the way, that happened in part because the pine beetle larva, which used to be killed by intensely cold winters, didn't get killed because the winters weren't intensely cold. All right, that's some serious about rising seas and wild weather. Let's talk just a little bit about other aspects of this. The other side of the wilder weather is what happens with other things, because there are impacts beyond us, clearly. We're seeing climate change impact the natural world in a significant way. Now, in a nutshell, animals and plants are used to adapting. and they do it very, very well. But this is happening so fast, much, much faster than anything that's happened in the natural evolution of things before, that they are having a very difficult time. So yes, they're trying to move northward, but sometimes they run out of room to move. When they try and move higher, they can't. Seasonal cycles disrupted by plants blooming earlier in the spring, and then there's a mismatch between the predators and the prey. And some ecosystems like coral reefs are very sensitive to temperature, and as the waters warm, those are essentially heat waves in the ocean, and it's very difficult for them to handle that. Our health is impacted. I'll just briefly say that worsening air quality leads to more asthma and other heat-related illnesses. Longer, stronger allergy seasons are already being seen, and even insect-carried diseases are more likely. For instance, we're seeing mosquito and tick-borne diseases like Zika, malaria, Lyme spreading into new locations and sticking around longer. And then there's impact on food and farming. It's impacting how we produce food, where we produce food. Wild weather events, flooding, drought, those impact crops in a massive way. We talk about drivers of inflation. There is a link to the changing climate in many instances. Planting zones shift, people have to make adjustments. That takes time and it takes money. Crop diseases and pests are spreading farther and sticking around longer as well. All right, we can take a little bit of a breath and get to my favorite part, the solvable part, because it is. Climate change is serious, but we have the power to act. Solutions already exist, but to stay below the levels that we need to, and I'm not going to get too wonky in these numbers, but if we don't do anything, we go up to here. 4 degrees Celsius is about 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and as I mentioned earlier, we don't even want to go there or think about it too much. But if we make emissions cuts, we can be down in this area. Some of the changes are baked in the cake. I told you CO2 lasts 100 years in the atmosphere. If we cut it all out tomorrow, we would still have issues. However, big changes will result in significant changes to temperatures and the things that go along with it. We have to reduce emissions quickly, and we do, by the way, have some potential to remove some CO2 from the atmosphere. So let's look briefly at what are the greenhouse gas sources in this country. About 30% of it from transportation, a little less than that from electricity, 22% from industry, and then a smattering from commercial and industrial, agricultural. Those aren't insignificant pieces of the pie by any means. We talk about other clean, renewable energy sources. In the western United States particularly, we have massive amounts of solar energy potential. The darker the shading, the more there is in terms of solar energy. But this is not an inconsequential amount even here. I certainly recognize the solar panels that you guys have and love not only seeing that, I love seeing it every time I drive by, but more and more we're seeing it on people's homes, even here, where people don't think about it much, but I applaud your congregation for doing that. How about the wind? The wind blowing in the dark blue, wherever the darker shades are, more amounts of potential wind energy exist here. These are just a couple of examples. There's hydro energy as well, which is already used in many areas but can be expanded also. We have a lot of potential in that area, and we can electrify transportation. Let's see. I'm not really sure why we lost the signal, but we'll hopefully reset it for just a moment. While Chuck is helping with that, we can use energy to heat and cool our buildings. We can do a lot of simple things. We can use electric heat pumps and efficient replacements for things that were typically used in both our homes and in our businesses. And by the way, the legislation passed recently, the IRA, has a lot of funding to help produce these positive changes to our grid. Thank you, Chuck. That's wonderful. Thank you. such genius. I love it. I love it. We can build better soils. We can reduce emissions with our farming practices. Agricultural practices lower methane emissions, and that's hugely important, as I mentioned. Composting food waste reduces methane emissions from landfills and backyards and reduces fertilizer back to crops. So there are things in that regard that we can do. Plants take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and convert it into plant tissue. Productive ecosystems like grasslands, wetlands, peatlands, they can accumulate carbon in soil and plants and keep it there and not allow it to be in the atmosphere. Maintaining these areas help prevent carbon from entering the atmosphere at all. And by the way, coastal wetlands also buffer against flooding from hurricanes or anything like that. Briefly, the power of trees. This is just in the city of Detroit, or the metropolitan area of Detroit. Trees do a lot of amazing things. They are not going to solve the problem in and of themselves, but it helps. They reduce stormwater runoff, they take a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere, and they absorb pollution. Just announced this last week, the city of Detroit is going to be committed to planting 75,000 trees in the next 5 years. And that's a wonderful effort, and we can all do our part in that as well. So, as I get ready to conclude, I just have to say, I recognize very, very clearly that this is a huge task. To stay close to about 3 degrees Fahrenheit, that's the target we're looking for, to not warm any more than about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, I said we're already close to 2. But to stay to that is going to be a huge job. But we have done big things before. I mean, indoor plumbing and taking care of sewage. 150 years ago, that didn't exist. But cities did that and massively increased the quality of life, the length of life. The average life expectancy as a result of that jumped by 20 or 30 years within a generation or two. That was a big deal that a lot of people thought we probably couldn't do. How about the space age? The space age ushered in all these technologies that we enjoy now, provided even satellite data that helps us understand the atmosphere better. Was that easy? No. As I think President Kennedy told us, we decided to go to the moon in part because it was hard. And what we're going to do is going to be hard. But that is not a reason not to do it. I would argue that it's a reason to do it. And what are we as Americans? We are potential moral and technological leaders of the world. So when people say to us, well, what's China doing? What's India doing? Believe me, we can be leaders, either positively or negatively. We can be looked to, as we have in many cases before, like even with the technological revolution. We've been leaders in that. Hey, 15 years ago, there weren't even iPhones. So let's think about how quickly our world has changed. That was a big deal, but we've done it. We've made an information technology revolution. It's largely been led by the minds and motivation and technology and spirit of people from this part of the world, and we changed the world. So we can do it. Please don't believe the naysayers that say that we can't. Reducing emissions is a win-win. We create jobs, we create new industries, it keeps us safer, and it limits future expenses from disasters. It does all these things, and yes, it is hard. But why do we do it? Well, that's why I do it. This is our daughter, this is our son, and I think about not only them, but I think about their as yet unborn children. I would like them to have a world that is livable, and that's why I talk about this whenever and however and to whomever I can. Only 1 in 3 Americans ever even talks about climate change. That's got to change. We start by talking to each other because it's hugely important to solving the problem. We have urgency in this. I'm going to borrow some language from Michael Mann, who's a climate scientist leader in this. There is urgency, I've shown you that, but we also have agency. And we have the ability to make the changes that have to be made. The obstacles really aren't physical or technological. Some might have you believe that, but they would like you to buy into doomism and to think that it's too far gone and we can't do this. But that's not the case. The obstacles, rather than being physical or technological, the obstacles are political. And I have to advance. Yes, this is simple. This goes back to the 1800s. Well understood science. It's serious. I showed you a lot of examples of that. It's solvable. We have what we need to make the changes. We need the will. Thanks to Scott Denning for the framing on this, and who's a great guy that works at Colorado State. And I want to end right here. 10 things you can do to combat climate change. This is not just the technical and science aspect of it. These are some ideas, because people always ask me, what can I do? And I think in this forum it makes a lot of sense. Typically, I put this at the very top for a reason. Talk to people about climate change. A survey that just came out last week. Huge number of people that think that climate change is serious. Here's the number of people that think other people think it's serious. It's a much smaller number. So in other words, you might think it's serious, but you'll say, my neighbor, they don't think it's serious, and they don't think it's serious. They might, but they're not talking to each other about it. We need to talk. So I might normally say that's number one, but because we're in the middle of October, I jump down to number 10. Vote with climate in mind. Vote with climate in mind. There are climate deniers out there that are running for office, and we want to replace them with people that recognize what's going on. And you can see for yourself the other things that I suggest, somewhat arbitrarily, but there's a lot of research behind some of this. I don't have to go over this. You can probably read it, and I'll leave it up there. Some of these things save you money. Some of these things you've heard of before. But I wanted to highlight number 1 and number 10 because I think they're intensely important, particularly now. So with that said, I'd like to open it up for a few minutes of questions. And again, I will be around if you want to ask something more one-on-one. I will be around after the service. Questions? Yes, please.
How much do you think electric cars will?
Electric cars are going to make a significant difference. But a big part of the key to that is you've still got to power the car. What's the electric grid? Okay, and that's a legitimate concern. So we need to do two things. We need to put more electric cars on the road, getting the greenhouse gas cars off the road, but we also need to continue to make the grid cleaner, which we're doing, but we still have a lot of work to go. A lot of people don't realize this. Nationwide, over 20% of the electrical grid is supplied by renewable energy nationwide, and the number keeps going up. It's over 20%. Now, unfortunately, we still got 20% that's supplied by coal. The rest is natural gas and nuclear. That make up about 60%. But electric cars will make a big difference, and they are catching on around the world. There are still some technological challenges, but they're going to make a difference. Other questions?
Hi, I was wondering why you didn't mention nuclear energy as a solution. Because
Why I did or didn't?
did not.
Okay. I just mentioned that nuclear energy supplies about 20% of the energy in the grid in this country. I will tell you this about the climate science world. There is mixed opinion on whether or not nuclear energy makes sense. I have studied that very, very carefully, and it's my personal opinion. I have to be very clear here. This is my opinion. I think it should be part of the solution. I really do, because it does not produce greenhouse gases. It produces other challenges. But here's the challenge in our country with nuclear energy. To build new plants is a tremendously involved process that's probably going to take minimum 20 years. And to be really frank, we don't have that long. We don't have that long to make significant changes. So should it be part of the solution? Yes, absolutely. Don't deactivate any nuclear plants, in my opinion. But if we want to say, hey, let's build nuclear to solve this problem, I don't think we have the luxury of that time. We've squandered too many decades to be able to do that. I'm just being really frank with you. Other questions? Yes?
My impression of the solar arrays is it's wonderful, love to do it, but it's so out of reach for my quote-unquote average household. What can we do to make that more available? When will it be affordable for the average consumer to buy that?
Right, that's a great question. In the last 10 years, here's part of the answer, technology. In the last 10 years, the solar power costs have gone down 90% on average. So driving down prices is a big part of the answer to your question. By the way, wind has gone down by 70% in the last 10 years, wind energy. So those are two big things. And the other, quite frankly, has to do with policy. I mean, the answer to making this happen is a three-pronged approach: individual action, corporate action, and government action. And government action, in the form of the legislation that was just passed, that I mentioned before, has significant subsidies for solar and other renewable energy. I'm not talking about just something for PR. I mean, we're talking about essentially close to a third of money that's invested in that by individuals will be rebated to them. That's the kind of governmental policy that we have not had on a national basis up until recently. It's going to make a difference. I think you will all be shocked 10 years from now what was just done, what it's going to change in terms of the power grid of this country. It's going to be very significant. But we need more of it, and we need to encourage it, and we need more of it. Other questions?
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you. So I actually work at a climate tech company called Remora Carbon. We're actually working on a device that will go onto semi-trucks and actually collect and sequester the CO2 that's released by semi-trucks. So cutting away at that 29% of that pie that you showed, that's a big deal. And I think it's important for folks to know that, especially in the Detroit area, that big piece of that transportation carbon emission pie, we have a lot of work going on, not just at my company, but there's other places nearby as well, working on EVs and things like that to help to reduce carbon emissions. So I also wanted to thank you for bringing up Eunice Foote, because nobody talks about her, and she is amazing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's very nice of you. Thank you, and thank you for your work. I appreciate it. Yeah, a lot of times I've run into, in other parts of the country, I've run into some skepticism. People say to me, "You're talking about climate change in Detroit?" Yes, we get it here. We get it. We realize that we have an important leadership role in Southeast Michigan based on our history and our corporate, the corporate governance that exists here. But I will tell you that there are a lot of businesses that really have seen what's going on and people that energize them, and they are making a difference. So again, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm going to turn it back over to Barb. I will stay for any other questions or comments, but thank you for your attention. I greatly appreciate it. Good luck making a difference. We're all going to make a difference.
Thank you, Chris. Such critical information, so important. With our offering, it will now be given and received in grateful appreciation of our shared hopes and values. We would also like to take this moment to recognize the countless non-financial contributions that keep the congregation going. Each of you contributes to our congregation just by being here. And remember, if you have a joy or sorrow, you can drop it in the basket. Thank you, Diana. I have not received any on my phone, any texts, any joys and sorrows in the offertory basket? All right, I did receive 2 from Hannah. Hear the postlude.